I would like to welcome to the stage our next speaker. We have from Freeverse, Alun Evans, to speak about living assets, evolutive NFTs for playing fair in the metaverse. Alun, over to you.
Thank you very much. Right, well, I was going to talk about living assets. I am going to talk about living assets, but my colleague Alex said, why don't you change the subject a bit and tell a story? And I thought, well, that's a good idea. I'll tell a story about punk music, right? And we're going to start the story by asking a question, right? And the question is, who in the games industry do you think has, or which personality in the games industry has had the most influence, right? So you might think it's Hideo Kojima, right? You might be a big fan of Japanese games, Metal Gear Solid and all that kind of stuff. You might think it's John Carmack, right? You might be, a Super Doom player. Or you might think it's, you might be a big world-building game player, so you might think it's Peter Molyneux, right? But I bet none of you thought about this gentleman, right? Chris Anderson. So Chris Anderson was the bassist for a rock group called REM, but not that REM. There were, in fact, two groups called REM, one led by Michael Stipe, which went on to become this multi-million, very successful rock group, and the other one who was formed, it was consisted of, let's say, by several people, including this gentleman here, Chris Anderson, right? And they had a battle of the bands to decide who was going to become, who had the rights to take the name REM forward. And unfortunately, for our hero here, Chris Anderson, he lost the battle of the bands. And so the other group called REM went forward and became world famous, and Chris went on to a different career. But we're actually very fortunate that he did that in the games industry, because he went on to become an economist, right? And he started to do quite a lot of very interesting work about the long tail in game economy, right? And there's a long tail, many of us will know a lot about it, in particularly in the free-to-play industry, right? Typically, you get a high revenue at the beginning when you launch a product, whether it's a software as a service or whether it's a game or whatever it is, and then that revenue flattens out towards the end. It's very, very common, right? And it comes from, originally some work that Mandelbrot did, so Mandelbrot famous for his fractals, but also this guy, Chris Anderson, the hero of our story, right? He wrote a book called The Long Tail, which really goes into the reasons and the why and the economics behind this kind of thing. And it's a very interesting book, it's worth reading. And it's very well known in the free-to-play industry, right? It's a very, very well-known phenomenon in the free-to-play industry. The idea is you release the game, you have this huge marketing push, big user acquisition drive, and you get this high revenue at the start, and of course then you start measuring your metrics, particularly your retention metric, because what you want to do is turn this peak of high revenue at the start, and you want to maximize the width and the length of that in a long tail, right? And it's usually linked to free-to-play games. Usually, if you want to maximize the long tail, you have to have quite a heavy live ops investment, right? You need to be really investing quite a lot in your game to make sure that you're retaining your players at the end of the day, right? So it's very well established in the free-to-play industry, and we don't need to look very far. In fact, one of the reasons I guess this conference series exists is because of the rise of free-to-play games and mobile games, Pocket Gamer, right? And there have been plenty of successful companies that have done very well, and what they've managed in each case is to maximize not only that initial revenue but also the long tail at the end. And then Chris Anderson comes back and he starts talking about how free-to-play could monetize all these different things in a different way. Why am I talking about all this kind of stuff in a session about the metaverse here at Pocket Gamer Connects and talking about NFTs? Well, what I want to talk about today is talk about Web3, right? And so Web3, as we heard in the panel earlier on, is this sort of mix of metaverse, blockchain, NFT, crypto, all that kind of stuff. What we talk about, people who talk about, those of us who talk a lot about Web3, we like to talk about Web 1, 2, and 3. So Web 1 was reading content, So you go to a static web that some programmer had made and you read the content. Web 2 was all about writing your own content. So, we had the introduction of social networks and blogging services and so on. So you could write your own content. And Web3 is all about owning, right? And that's what people say. What does ownership really mean? And I think beyond the buzzwords that you hear about, like metaverse and NFTs and cryptocurrencies, and ownership, what ownership means is one very clear thing. It means that you have the power to sell what you've bought, right? And this, in the games field, is quite a big, I guess I call it a challenge, right? Because suddenly, for the first time, if you're allowing your gamers to sell what they've purchased, then you are allowing them to extract value from your game economy, right? So why would you want to do that? Why would you want to allow players to extract value from your game economy when you've got it working? Your free-to-play economy designers, who you pay a lot of money, have got your game economy humming very nicely, right? Why would you want to allow players to extract value from that? And I guess the answer is to do with the long tail, right? The answer is to do with the long tail. And the question I want to ask, the question I'm interested in, particularly in the games industry, is can secondary market trading lift that long tail? Right? And we're all familiar with, like, OpenSea and various other markets and so on, and every other NFT market, whether it's a private market or whether it's a public market. The question is, is the ability to, that ownership, which allows you to trade things secondhand, can it actually maximize or even indeed lift that long tail, right? So here we have our standard graph. Can we add secondary markets and actually do this with it, right? I don't know. I don't think anyone knows at the moment yet, but I think it's something that's worth looking into, because there is definitely the fact that we're talking about this here, the fact that we have these tracks here on blockchain and metaverse and NFTs mean that people are interested in the subject, and means that we're working towards it. So if that's going to happen, what do we need to make it happen? Well, the first thing is, I think you need to understand what are the problems with allowing secondary markets in games, right? Perhaps the first one is that you're losing control as the developer, right? One of the most important things about creating a video game is that when you actually launch your game in the traditional way, you have control over everything inside it. Yeah? Maybe now you have user-generated content, but even that has to be heavily moderated, otherwise you have unsuitable content, let's say, flying around your game in your virtual world. So the problem is that when you're allowing users to trade things outside of the game to other gamers, you're losing that element of control. So that's one problem. And the second problem, this is, I think, the biggest problem, is that assets at the moment, let's call them NFTs, right, are these static collectible items. And that's fine. I'm not hating on that, right? People do collect things in the real world, right? People collect stamps, and Alex, my colleague who inspired this talk, he likes guitars. He collects guitars, right? Great. People collect things in the real world, but the percentage of the real world economy that is dedicated to collectibles is tiny compared to the rest of the real world economy. And I guess what my vision is that the percentage of the digital economy that is dedicated to collectibles should also be just a fraction of the size of the whole digital economy. And to make that happen, we need to move beyond collectibles, right? We need to have assets that can evolve and change so that how they are used and their utility, this is something we were talking about in the previous panel, their utility should contribute to their value, should determine their value rather than just their scarcity. And it makes sense, right? So, if we can do this, then we have a way of engaging that long tail by using Web3 technology. There's a reason for using Web3 technology beyond just saying that we're cool and hip and trendy, right? So what happens if we remove the immutability from NFTs? What happens if we say NFTs are not these immutable items, they can never change, they're just collectibles? It makes sense, right? If you launch a game and it doesn't work, then you're going to release a patch and you're going to fix it, right? If you have your first-time user experience and you see it's not working, then you're going to update it and you're going to iterate it and you're going to fix it, right? If you see that there's an in-app purchase working in your game, you're going to pile in on that and make it and double down on that. You would make more of it available to a certain extent because you see it's working, right? And so if you have this static asset that you cannot remove because it's there forever, once it's been created, it's on the blockchain forever, then why wouldn't you want to change it based on how it's being used in the game? And so at Freeverse, we call this concept the living asset NFT. And it actually leads to some really interesting different use cases and different design cases, right? Think of, for example, a sports game, right, where you have a character, a player, if you like, in your sports team, right? Now, in a regular football game, for example, you can imagine, like I live in Barcelona, Spain. I have a picture of Leo Messi. It breaks my heart. He's not there anymore, right? But here we are with Leo Messi. Imagine you had Leo Messi in your team, right? In a regular football game, you would train that Leo Messi up. You'd make him fitter and faster and stronger. You'd spend points. You'd do whatever it is. You might buy purchases. And you'd turn him into a 6-star Leo Messi by playing the game. Yeah? You would play the game, and by playing the game, you would upgrade the assets. You can't do that with a collectible NFT. You just get Leo Messi NFT. And what's the value of that to somebody else? The value is based on whatever someone is going to pay for it, right? And that value is determined by this thing called artificial scarcity or artificial rarity. There's only 1 of 10 Leo Messis. Get them while you can. I mean, that's fine, but that's not how things work in the real world. We value, if you're going to buy my phone, right, it's over there with my colleague Steffi, right? If you're going to buy my phone, you're not going to buy it because it's a rare iPhone. You're going to buy it because it's a good condition iPhone with one careful owner, right? And if it's got a broken screen, you're not going to buy it. The value of things depends on how they've been used. And so if you now have a living asset NFT that, yes, might be rare because it's Leo Messi, but it has been upgraded, it's been changed by being used by the player, then its value is greater, right? Think the other way around, right? Let's carry on with a football example. Let's imagine that a football player gets older, right? Leo Messi is no spring chicken anymore, right? At some point, he's going to retire, yeah? At which point, what is his value to somebody else, right? Well, less, because you can't use him in your game because he's retired, yeah? So you have this thing called the Tamagotchi mechanic, right? You can build into your game mechanics this ability for assets to degrade automatically over time unless the user comes back to train to them. Think of the football player who gets unfit. Think of the car. We saw a car racing game earlier on, right? What happens when you service your car, or you crash your car, or you change the tires, or you upgrade the engine, right? These are common game mechanics that you cannot do with regular NFTs, right? And so this idea of being able to engage users as the value of their asset drops over time, automatically, because you're not going back, you're creating this massive retention loop. The Tamagotchi was released 20 years ago. It had the most amazing retention mechanic ever. You must go to your pet 5 times a day and give it medicine, or it will die, right? So you can do that if that NFT is a dynamic NFT, right? If it behaves like a regular game asset, more than just a collectible, then you're giving it value. And you can even introduce other elements of, let's call it Web 2 engagement, right? Imagine if you have an NFT that represents something standard like a level, right? As that NFT gets leveled up from level 1 to level 10, it starts becoming more useful to the owner, right? It starts off with just some, photos or videos or 3D or whatever it represents, whether it's a celebrity or a game or whatever. But as that level goes up, then it starts to unlock different things that only the owner of that NFT has. Maybe it unlocks VIP access to a Discord channel. Maybe it unlocks discounts on merchandise. Maybe it unlocks tickets to a real event, right? Maybe it unlocks a meet and greet or a dinner with your favorite, pop star, right? And how do you upgrade that NFT? Well, you do it by engaging with it, yeah? By engaging with it via traditional Web 2 methods, right? You can share on Twitter or Instagram or on LinkedIn, right? Or you can participate in Discords. You can do market research. You can do quizzes. You can do any sort of Web 2. We go back to that idea of Web 2, right? That writing element of Web 2. You can upgrade the level of that NFT, right? Or you can pay. You can watch adverts. You can pay a subscription. You can do a one-off payment, you can upgrade. That's also a valid way of doing things. After all, we do have to run, for all the dream of, decentralized, metaverse, ultimately we have to make money. We're all businesses, right? So there are these all different mechanics of using what we call living assets, NFTs, to engage gamers and to engage users. So to do that, there are a few things, and then I'm going to finish. There are a few things that have to happen, right? The first thing that has to happen is that this idea of a dynamic NFT, it can't just be a link to a server somewhere. All those changes, all that data has to exist on the blockchain, right? If you've upgraded your football player from a 3-star football player to a 6-star football player, who proves that you've done that? Yeah, that change has to exist on the blockchain forever. And what happens, by the way, when you see, inverted commas, dynamic NFTs, quite often, what you're actually seeing is a link to a server that essentially a private server, right? don'thackme.com, which just has the data of the NFT, yeah? And if that server is hacked or goes down or gets taken down or whatever happens to it, then that NFT is literally worthless. It's literally worthless. So it's really important to have all that data stored and certified on the blockchain at all times. Otherwise, it's senseless, yeah? You've got to be able to do it at scale. I remember when CryptoKitties came out in 2017, I think they had what was it at peak? They had 100,000 users, something like that. And it broke Ethereum. And then Polygon, Ethereum's scaling solution, had what was it called? Sunflower something or others. It had 500,000 weekly active users, and it broke Polygon. And you're like, 500,000 weekly active users, the fellas at King laugh at such figures. It's peanuts to the games industry, right? Unless you can have NFTs and blockchain technology that is truly scalable, you're never going to hit the mass market. You've got to have millions of NFTs. You have to be able to say, I want to make an NFT for every bullet fired and every match of Counter-Strike. If you can't say that, you're in trouble, I think. And to monetize that long tail, yeah, you need to be able to set the fees in your secondary markets. Yeah, you need to be able to say, okay, every time this asset is sold, I, as the original asset creator, retain the right to charge a percentage of sale. And that could be 2%. It could be 5%. You could go full Apple and charge 30%. By the way, did you see that Apple are permitting now NFTs in the sale of games from yesterday? That's a good sign. I knew they would. I say now. And the final thing is, and going back again to what the panel said earlier on, it has to be simple, right? Whether you like it or not, blockchain technology at its core is not trivial, right? It does require some technical knowledge, and so it's got to be very easy. Kay said earlier on about having API compatibilities. That's something that's really, really important. And it makes it easier for game developers or brands or webs to engage and create these new applications. So it's kind of what we do at Freeverse. Here's the minor plug at the end. We do have these dynamic NFTs, living assets we call them, where all the changes of that NFT are stored on the blockchain forever, and so they're valued by what they have, what the user has done with them and their utility to other people, rather than their scarcity. We can do it at scale. We're a layer 2, built on Polygon, so we're technically a layer 3, right? So we can scale up to millions of NFTs. We allow all of our clients, the original NFT creators, to set a fee. Every time that NFT is traded in the future, they can set whatever fee they want. And our API is super, really easy to use. It's plug and play for any, moderately experienced developer can get up and running within a day, basically. So that's kind of a little bit what we do at Freeverse, and I hope that, this will enable that long tail to come ahead and make sure, prove it doesn't have to be flat, maximize the revenue in the future, including these living assets, and who knows, maybe another punk bassist, frustrated punk bassist will come out and set the rules and write the rule book for Web3 monetization. I'm Alun Evans. I'm the CEO of Freeverse. Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Alun, thank you very much. That was very interesting. And we've got a little time for questions. We're running a little bit behind in this room. And I should say that our next advertised speaker, Derek Lau, doesn't seem to have been able to make it today. So we're going to go straight to our panel in just a few minutes' time. So we've got so we'll have a little time built in for questions. So Alun, that was very interesting. Someone's ahead of me. I've got a question. I can come later.
I had a practical question. So obviously, if everything is running on blockchain, and we are talking about mobile world where the attention of users is very short, what do you think is the best workaround in terms of optimizing? Like, what should be a transaction and what cannot be or shouldn't be a transaction in a mobile world, where even if Polygon is sort of empty at the moment, transaction will take 10 seconds, which might be potentially deadly for a mobile game attention.
That's a great question. Minor pitch for Freeverse, because we're a layer above all the blockchains, whether it's Polygon or Ethereum or Hedera. All our transactions in our layer 2 occur instantaneously, right? So we focus on that ability to be able to scale and scale quickly. So you can create millions of NFTs in an instant. You can update their properties in an instant. They can be traded. The trading does take time. I think the trading is the one thing that has to be, because the trading has to be verified by the underlying blockchain. So the answer to your question is a very good one, right? And I think a lot of game designers are going to be looking into this in the future. For example, in the game that we created a couple of years ago about this, which is shortly being licensed to a very famous, world-famous football IP, which we're very excited about. What we did was that we had the major assets in the game, such as the players, the football players themselves, as NFTs, and we actually gifted those NFTs for free, right? So when you started the game, you got 18 free NFTs without even realizing. You didn't even realize they were NFTs. They were just football players. And I think that is the key point, is that if you get to the stage where the user doesn't even know that they have NFTs in the game, because it's a great game and they're enjoying the game, and that's the important thing. It should be a great game first and foremost, and then those users who want to engage with that Web3 component can do so if they choose. Then you add that component in, yeah? So, I don't think making every bullet in Counter-Strike an NFT is necessarily a good example, but I do think making those key elements that would make sense to be traded, whether it's a magical axe or whether it's a car or whatever it is, that makes sense to tokenize, yeah.
That's great, thank you. Do we have any other questions for Alun? And I was going to ask you a question about scale, actually. So you mentioned the important thing is scale there. The talk before you, I think Patty pointed out that the opportunity for the metaverse, she said there are over 5 billion people are connected to the internet, which is a lot of people. Whereas blockchain and NFT so far, a tiny fraction of that are engaging with that. How do Freeverse go around about alleviating people's green concerns? Because one of the things that's often spoken about with NFTs is the power involved. The more people we get into the platform, the more we have to ask ourselves about that, don't we?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Energy consumption at Freeverse is something that we don't necessarily worry about. For part of the layer 2 we've built means that all the transactions, essentially, what we do and what some great companies, whether it's like Starkware or Immutable or whoever it is, all this layer 2 solution, what they actually do is that you're essentially crunching many transactions into one single one, right? Into a single proof. And so what you're doing is you're actually, rather than doing 1 million transactions a second, which you wouldn't be able to do anyway, and would indeed use a lot of energy, what you're doing is you're crunching the results of those transactions into a single transaction with some very heavy maths, and you're posting the mathematical proof of that every 10 or 15 minutes on the underlying blockchain. So the actual blockchain usage is very, very low, and the actual crunching of those numbers is relatively power-friendly, energy-friendly, let's say, as well, right? So depending on the approximation you use. I do think that's the solution. It's a little bit like the Bitcoin Lightning Network, right, where you have, rather than having, I pay you, you pay him, he pays her, and so on, you actually have a chain of transactions, and then at the end, once the chain resolves, you just post one transaction. Do you see what I mean? So that ability of accelerating those transactions with off-chain, or let's say layer 2 solutions, I think that's definitely an answer to the green argument, which I agree is very valid.
That's great. Thank you. That's a good answer. Thank you.